I'm delighted to be welcoming Caroline Hulse and Richard Roper. And thank you to Alex and Virginia at Orion Books for organising this event this evening. These events are free, but if you'd like to give a donation to Libraries Unlimited, which is the charity that runs the 54 libraries and mobile libraries in Devon and Tor Bay, there is a link in the chat. And we're also posting to over 30 libraries across Devon this evening. So hello to everybody else who's watching. If you'd like to ask a question, please pop it in the chat and I will ask Caroline and Richard. So Caroline Hulse lives in Manchester with her husband and a small controlling dog who we might see this evening.
You might hear her, yeah.
She is the author of Like a House on Fire and The Adults, and All the Fun of the Fair is now out now. Her books have been published in 14 different languages and optioned for television. And I'm just going down to Richard, because I've got you all written down in front of me. So Richard is an author and an editor, and he grew up in Stratford-upon-Avon and now lives in London. Something to Die For was his first novel and has been translated into 19 different languages. And his second novel, When We Were Young, is out now. And he commissions non-fiction books at headline publishers and does a bit of editing and proofreading over at Reedsy. I don't know what Reedsy is actually, so I'll have to ask you that in a second.
Okay.
So hello to you both, and thank you for joining us this evening. Shall we start by you just telling the viewers about your latest books, All the Fun of the Fair and When We Were Young, and we'll go from there. Who wants to start?
Right. Shall I start?
Yeah.
So hi everyone. So All the Fun of the Fair is a coming of age story about an 11-year-old girl called Fiona Larson. And it's about basically the fair is the only good thing that happens in her small town each year. And Fiona is the only kid in town who's not allowed to go. And she's never been to the fair, and that's because before she was born, her elder sister died there. But this year, Fiona's determined things are going to be different because she's not happy with that state of affairs. So this year, she's determined she's going to solve the mystery of her sister's death and finally get to the fair. And yeah, it's a coming of age story set in the 90s, I should say, set in 1996.
When We Were Young, which came out a couple of months ago, and tells the story of Theo and Joel, who were two childhood friends who were best friends, in fact, until something happened which kind of split them asunder, and they haven't seen each other for 15 years or so. But then one day Joel turns up on Theo's birthday and reminds him that they made a promise to each other when they were kids that they were going to walk the Thames path in its entirety when they reached the grand old age of 30. So they decide, after some cajoling on Joel's part to Theo, to walk the Thames path from its source in Gloucestershire to the Thames Barrier in London. And we see what a sort of very kind of British version of a road trip play out, while also learning about some of the secrets they've been keeping each other since they were kids.
Thank you. And as you said, both of your books have secrets in them, and they're sort of uncovered, aren't they, as you go through the books. In Fiona's case, it's, you know, her parents have kept the truth from her, and we know that Joel and Theo, like you say, have had a falling out, but we don't know why in the beginning. Is it difficult to write without giving too much away to begin with? Because obviously, you know, the whole thing with the book is that you sort of drop little bits in. So is that a challenge?
Yeah, I think it is. I think the challenge is doing it in a way that feels authentic, because I think you want to do it in a way that holds information back from the reader, but doesn't feel like the reader's just deliberately not being told. If they were just told that one thing, everything would be fine. So in the case of my book, it is that her parents haven't told her what happened for a reason, and then you find out that reason as the book goes on. But as a writer, I suppose you do spend quite a bit of time. I do a lot of planning on the plot long before I actually start writing, and trying to work out how you can hold enough back to authentically hold it back and not annoy the reader, that you just haven't told them the key thing, but also drop things in so it's a satisfying read. I mean, I love a mystery in any kind of book, really, whether it's obviously a traditional mystery, but also, you know, in books like ours, I like that, where there's something that you're trying to work out at the same time. But then that does require, you know, slightly more careful plotting maybe than if you didn't have a mystery. Because you always got to have one eye on what the reader knows and what they don't know.
We'll come back to plotting later, because I'm fascinated with your plotting.
Yeah, I think it's a really fine balance, that idea of having kind of withholding information from the reader, because like Caroline says, it kind of, I think we've all read those books or seen TV or films where, you know, there's always that sort of flashback scene where they reveal a little bit more each time, and sometimes it works brilliantly, and you're sort of on the edge of your seat and you're desperate to know what, you know, they're slowly revealing more each time, and sometimes you just think, just tell us so we can then get to the end of this. So I think that is the challenge when you're writing something where I think certainly, I mean, I think what Caroline does so brilliant in her book is that Fiona is the one who is desperate to try and find out what the secret is. So she's moving along at the same time as the reader, and the more she finds out and the closer she gets to the truth, the more we're sort of coming along for the ride. And I think that's a brilliant way of keeping the reader invested.
Definitely. I think as you both said, it can be, if it's not done well, it can be irritating, and if it's like in your books done gradually and you sort of find out as you go along, and
yeah, we both do it brilliantly.
Absolutely, yeah, we do perfectly. Both your stories are about sort of growing up, aren't they, and the challenges of sort of that sort of, like you said, coming of age and learning about being older and almost being an adult, and the things that happen to you. Did you sort of draw on your own experiences for your characters, or were they very much sort of, you know, sort of the people around you? Did you use experiences of others, or, I mean, yeah.
I tend to do a bit of everything. So I try to distance myself from my main characters as much as possible, and just try and keep that, you know, because obviously everything is out of your head. So, but anything I can do to keep that distance just makes it easier for me in a way. So I spend a lot of time sort of recreating some of the feelings, but I try to put other people's experience on. So when I knew I was writing a book that was coming of age, about 11-year-old, I did a lot of asking around at friends, people I work with, my editor, and a lot of the stories in the book are based on true stories, but they're not actually mine. But the feelings and some of the stuff about, you know, the extreme disappointment and the extreme happiness, and how some of those things in that age, it's quite small things, but can feel really, really important. I remember those feelings. So, you know, the feelings are probably mine. But I don't know if you do this, Richard, but I do try and keep that little bit of distance between myself, because otherwise it feels a bit too much like a memoir. But you can't, you know, things can't help sneaking in. A lot of the characters talk like me originally, and then, you know, I have to do some work on that so that to get that distance. But it is hard. How do you balance the authenticity with just trying to, you know, not just mine your whole life completely and all your most embarrassing moments?
Yeah, I think I mean, I'd love to say that I'm as disciplined as that, but I think partly it's possibly out of a slight kind of I think the more authentic things I write tend to have been drawn on largely from sort of personal experience, or like you say, at least a sort of feeling, or a just sort of some, you know, some sense of the character. And I mean, I do nick lots of things from family and friends, and then feel mortified about it when they spot them, even though I try and disguise it. But I think in the case of this book, I certainly, I mean, I grew up in the countryside and was a very bored teenager. Originally, there was lots of stuff in the book about these teenagers being in really terrible bands, which I was in, the sort of bands that, you know, you really want to sort of smash the system, but it's quite hard when you're playing at Bidford on Avon Village Hall near an owl sanctuary. And I think the sort of the thing that I did draw on a little bit was, and I know it kind of sounds ridiculous, but turning 30 was a sort of strange milestone, in that I did find myself, I think probably for the first time, taking an objective look at my sort of those teenage years where everything's sort of so intense, and when you're in it and, you know, you're having all those, you know, first love and getting into scrapes and all that kind of stuff, it feels you don't really have any time to kind of sort of sit back and think about those years. So that's what I did. And I happened to walk some of the Thames path myself, just on a bit of a whim, really. And a friend came out and met me for a sort of leg of that. And it, you know, we talked a lot of nonsense and sort of, you know, reminisced. And I suppose that was certainly the kind of spark of the idea for it, was that walk. And
sort of Richard as well, with Theo and Joel's friendship, you know, they're not friends in the beginning of the book, and you don't know why, but the male friendship isn't explored as much in books. as female friendship. It's almost, you know, just taken for granted that women's friendships are going to be written about in a book. Do you think that's because men are perhaps not as open about their sort of friendships and feelings, that people don't write about them? And was that something that sort of made you want to do that, or did it sort of happen that way?
I don't think I deliberately set out to write a kind of male friendship book, although I had read lots of really great books about female friendship in recent years. In particular, Dolly Alderton's memoir, I thought, had an amazing chapter about friendship. And I suppose that, yeah, I don't know whether the sort of male friendship you tend to see, certainly on sort of in films, tends to be that kind of quite laddie kind of bromance thing. And I think that the truth of it is, with male friendship, is that I think there's a lot of truth. That there's a great line that Dylan Moran, this comedian, talks about in his stand-up, where men sort of can go out and, you know, be in the pub for 6 hours and come back home, and, you know, their partner sort of says, "Oh, how's Dave?" And he sort of say, "I don't know, what are you talking about? How would I know how he is? You just spend 6 hours with him." And I think that certainly that was what I definitely wanted. The more I was writing the book, the more I realized that was what it was about. And it was quite an interesting experience being edited, actually, with that, because my editor is a woman, and she was slightly sort of confused at points as to why, not confused, but was wanting me to kind of have these characters open up to each other more. And I had to sort of try and push back on that to a certain extent, because the point was they couldn't. But then we sort of compromised in a way where it was, you'd hear a lot more of, that's why it was quite helpful writing from the first person from these characters, was you could hear what they wanted to say to each other, and then see the difference between that and then what they could actually say to each other, which I think worked out quite nicely in the end.
Okay.
And Richard, can I ask, what was the name of your bands? Can you remember any of the names?
I can remember, and I can't believe it's too tragic, really.
Okay.
Oh, you can tell us now.
There was a band called P Handle.
P Handle.
Leave it there.
Okay. Thank you.
Were you ever in a band?
No embarrassing band names for me.
God, no, I've never. No, I don't sing. My husband would say no, never. I'm tone deaf.
I'm a very enthusiastic amateur singer, which means that I love a bit of karaoke. But yeah, no bands. I'm afraid no one would want me in a band. Did
you sing, Richard, or did you play?
I was the drummer, so I got to sort of sit at the back and sort of look moody, and mainly a lot of hiding.
Caroline, when you wrote from the perspective of Fiona, did you find that difficult to become? Because you were saying that, you know, you tried to sort of distance yourself, and that you spoke to people about sort of their sort of 11 stroke nearly 12-year-old. Was it hard to get into the head of a young girl, did it sort of, when as you started, it sort of became more natural?
Yeah, worryingly, it wasn't hard at all. And I don't know what that says about me at the age of 44, that being 11 feels like it's, you know, not that long ago. So no, I think when I decided I wanted to write a coming of age story, I did think about writing one now, and I just didn't think I'd be able to get into the head of an 11-year-old now, just because I think the world has changed so much. You know, my friends' children, their experience of life is so different. So the reason it's set in 1996, to be quite honest, is because I felt like that's probably the last kind of era where I might be able to relate. Even though I was a child of the 80s, I would be able to relate to a child of that kind of age. So, but then of course, I think when the internet came in and all that sort of thing, you know, I think the experience of childhood now will be different. But no, I think those feelings, I think the feelings you have now are less strong. But they're definitely an echo of the feelings I had when I was 11, and that, you know, the social hierarchy being really important, you know, not being able to go to the fair when the whole of the rest of the school could go. That wasn't my experience, but I can imagine how that would feel. So I found it, yeah, a little bit worryingly easy to write as an 11-year-old. But I don't know if it's the same for everyone.
I was going to say, 11, 12 is quite a sort of, is a real struggle, isn't it? Because it's the time that you change from sort of primary school to secondary school, and that's massive in itself. You know, it's such a transition in a child's life to go from being, well, you really go from being a big fish in a little pond to a very small fish in a huge pond, don't you?
Yeah, and I think you're developing your own personality, and it's that sort of age. In that era, it's a sort of age where you're starting to do things on your own a little bit more. I mean, I don't know if kids could walk home from school on their own at that age now, but you know, you're getting that little bit of independence, but it's before puberty. So there's an awareness of sexuality and things, but everything like that's still, you know, a little bit murky, a little bit blurry. It's just that kind of just before time. And the fact that it's, you know, it's in 96, so it's kind of just before the internet is going to become a huge part of their lives. And it's just before puberty and sexuality and things is going to become a big part of their lives. So I was trying to capture that feeling of being on the cusp, really.
Yeah,
she basically, Fiona is very, very sure of how the world works. So she's really clear on hierarchies. She's really clear on what's good, what's bad. You know, the advantages of boys over girls, all that kind of thing. And she describes all that as facts. And she's certain of that stuff, but you as a reader have a slightly different view. And that's one of the things I really liked about writing a child, is writing some of that absolute clarity of what they think about everything. And then you as a reader, hopefully, don't have necessarily the same view that she does. And, you know, so there's an element of unreliability to the narrator, even though she's telling you the absolute truth as she sees it.
Yeah, I love an unreliable narrator. I think they make books so much more interesting, don't they? You know, you just don't know what. And also, yeah, like a child as well. They just, yeah, what they think is absolutely, you know, clear cut and straight is not necessarily the case.
Exactly, yeah. And I think while she's trying to solve what she sees as the mystery of her sister's death, there's other things going on in the book that she's not aware of, that you as a reader piece together. And you know, that was quite satisfying. That was kind of when I first decided I wanted to write this book, that was my main aim, was to write a story where the narrator is not aware at all of what's going on, but you as a reader are piecing different things together. And it was really good fun to write, actually, and it was quite complicated to write on that basis, but you know, it was a nice mental stretch, I suppose, to see how can I do this, but in a way that doesn't make Fiona look like she's, you know, not very bright or missing the point, but just a lot of this stuff is just stuff in the adult world that she just wouldn't even think about, but that you as a reader go, hang on, that looks a bit different to me.
And actually, while you're talking about sort of how it was difficult to write, I read an interview with you that said that you how you were discussing your plotting and the spreadsheet. So I was fascinated with the spreadsheet because I don't really do spreadsheets. So the question to you both is, how do you plot, or do you plot? Because in the case of, I know that you plot, Caroline, but Richard, do you plot?
So I love a spreadsheet. Sorry, I keep going first, Richard, so tell me if this is annoying. But yeah, so I love a spreadsheet. In all walks of life, I just love them, and I find it the most helpful way of getting a sense of the book, because I don't think I'm a very natural writer. I know there's a lot of writers who will just sit down and write. For me, I've got to know where I'm heading to. I think I've got a bit of a fear of the blank page. So part of the reason I plot everything out really carefully before I start is so that I've got a sense of where I'm going, sense that is there enough material to fill a book? Have I weaved in that I'm dropping in sort of clues, as source of clues at the right point in the book? And the site I plot out in really, really extensive detail. And the most depressing thing is then it all goes out the window anyway, because once I start writing it, then you learn more about the book anyway. And then, you know, then I have to replot again. But I don't think I can do it without, I think the first book I ever wrote, I did it all on like index cards. And that just gave me confidence, because so much of writing a book feels like it's about confidence. You've got to kind of believe it, and you've got to believe it through all the, maybe it's just me, through all the dross that you write as well. So Richard, I'm sure you don't write dross, but I write a lot of dross as I go along. And you've just got to retain that confidence that you're going somewhere, that it's going to work. So that's why I plot out loads of detail, though. I'm really jealous of those writers who say they just sit down and it just comes to them, and they trust that it comes to them naturally.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the dross drafts are kind of, I mean, it's sort of the real kind of bread and butter, I think, where you almost know as you're doing it that, you know, that you're going to be rewriting all of this, and that's a terrible paragraph, and that none of that works. But I think similarly, I have been, certainly with my first book, a big plotter as well, and it feels like having those kind of signposts as you go along, where you know the sort of major beats of the story, you know what the big reveals are going to be, and having a sort of sense of what your character's going to be like on the first page compared to where they're on the last page, that at least means that when you're having a day where you are just, nothing's coming to you, but you're just sort of getting the words down, you are at least moving to the next point. And I think that I was one of those sort of strange quirks of fate, where I think it helped that I wrote 2 books before the first one that got published, which were just me really kind of messing around, and I didn't plot. I just had a kind of an idea I wanted to work with, and I just sort of typed out these 2 books, which I sort of, both of them I just knew weren't quite kind of good enough, but they were, that just, I think, was the sort of gave me that kind of that grounding in just how to write, how to knock out 1,000 words a day or whatever it is, just to kind of get, so you knew that you could do it. And then with my sort of first book, the one that got published, it was, I think, what's going to be a very probably once in a career thing, where I read an article which inspired the book, and in about 2 days I had the whole thing in my head, and the plot changed a little bit from the sort of beginning to when it was edited and everything, but it didn't really change a huge amount, because it just seemed to all fall into place. And then of course I got incredibly cocky and just thought, well, I've got this, I somehow have solved writing. And I know, of course, then when it came to the second one, when we were young, it was a completely torturous process and draft. There was a million different drafts, and all the things I plotted went out the window. And my editors, there was huge sort of discussions about getting rid of X, Y, and Z and bringing in more things, and it completely changed. And I imagined that every book I write from now on will probably work in a slightly different way. But I think, like Caroline, I think I have to have at least that sense of, the plot pretty much there. Exactly.
Sorry.
That's all right.
She wasn't a fan.
I've read a couple of books on writing which are really helpful, and the one that was the biggest help, John Yorke's book Into the Woods, which is amazing on storytelling and structure, and particularly because it's written using examples from things like episodes of EastEnders and stuff, and it's incredibly sort of helpful, and it just is a way of kind of learning, there needs to be tension and there needs to be character arcs and all of that kind of stuff. And I think kind of reading things like that has really helped sort of me kind of sort of reaffirm my commitment to having a plot in place before I even get started.
So how did you both get into writing? I know
I find
sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think it's almost dangerous. You can actually write a book without actually knowing that much about how to write a book. And then as you learn, as you go along, you think, God, how did I do this? How did I do this in the first place? Now I realise how much there is to know and how many different moving parts there are. And I think, with what Richard said about his first book there, and that sort of it all falling into place, I think a lot of people do have that experience, but it doesn't happen for every book. And then you do, I suppose, if you're used to that and that is your process, then that can again feel quite daunting. And so you spend a long time with a book when you're working on it, and you do need to keep that confidence with it that it's worth doing. So anything you can do to kind of help yourself stay with it and not go, do you know what, this is a pile of rubbish. And I think everyone's got different techniques to do that. But anything that just keeps you at it, because then it will end up being, hopefully it will be good enough by the end, but you just have quite painful moments. And I think you forget, I certainly do, I forget, once you've got a finished book, I forget how hard it was to get there. And then I think, I'm having problems, I didn't have these problems with the last book. When I will have had the same problems with the last book, I've just forgotten about it.
Did you, as an editor, Richard, do you find it difficult when you come to the editing process for your own work? Is it hard? Because I know you edit non-fiction, don't you? So I guess it's different. I mean, I don't know much about the editing process, but
I don't know whether it sort of helps or hinders me. I know that I sort of, it's maybe a much more sensitive editor, I think, because I'm someone who likes to think I have quite a thick skin, but when I get the editorial letter with my editor's notes after they read a draft, it is honestly, it's 24 hours of just sort of the blinds come down. It's sort of, I'm lying in the dark like a sort of consumptive child, because it just feels horrible, because you can't, you ignore the first bit which says this is really good, and then you focus on all the bits and it just seems just entirely insurmountable and terrifying, and it's an awful lot of hard work, and you're thinking, why am I bothering, and all of these, and it's sort of, and I have that for about 24 hours, and I call my poor agent and tell her that I'm going to quit and that I'm going to go off and become a sort of monk on an island somewhere, and then she says, okay, like you were going to last time, and I say yes. And then it's that slow sort of realization that these editors get paid to do their jobs, or certainly mine do, because they're brilliant, and they are, everything they've said you realize is absolutely spot on, and then it's just hard work. Like, I don't really mind a first draft, as painful as it is. Occasionally you have the odd day where you just think, no, it's not working today, but there are moments you sort of, I kind of have one day a week, say, where it feels a little bit like if you're driving and there are a bunch of traffic lights all in a row and they all just go green as you're approaching them, and you get through, and I have one day a week that's like that, and I think, oh, this is magic, this is brilliant. And so having enough of those is kind of great, but the editing thing is kind of like pulling teeth. So it's meant that when I now am editing my authors on the non-fiction side, I tend to be a lot more gentle, shall we say, with my feedback, and the way that they probably think I've gone mad. They think I'm a long love letter rather than just saying cut that bit at the beginning. It's a bit slow. But
what's happened to Richard? I remember that from essays, though. I just can't take criticism, and I'm pleased to know that I'm not the only one, because I always used to think, oh, this is dreadful, like I'm rubbish, I can't write essays, but obviously it is quite a natural thing, isn't it? That it's just someone saying that you're not amazing, I guess. You're amazing, but not everything you've written is amazing.
Yeah, I think particularly because it could, you've absolutely sort of slaved over as a really thing, an inspired thing. You think of, oh, this flashback will fix everything, and there are 2 or 3 lines in it which you love, and you think, oh, this is, I'm so pleased with that joke or that metaphor or whatever it is. And then if you get a response which is, well, we need to cut this, it doesn't make any sense, or quite, because they've got to do their jobs, and sometimes they've got to be quite, brusque and tell you that it's not working, and it's hard to then, you almost want to say, you weren't there, you didn't see me as I was.
Yeah, my eyes are watering from coughing, so apologies. It's not the talking about the editing process that's making me cry. My editor always says things to me like, oh, it feels like you've shoehorned this bit in, which is usually about a bit I've shoehorned in and hope you wouldn't notice. So I love the editing stage, but only because I hate being on my own. And I think you're on your own with the first draft for so long. I'm just so grateful. Even if my editor tells me it's awful and needs to change, I'm just really grateful to have someone to discuss it with. Because yeah, there definitely comes to a stage, I'm at that stage at the moment with the first draft of the next book, where just me in my head, and I've had enough of me, so I can't wait to talk to him about it and get a different perspective. It kind of re-energizes me, even though there's so much work involved. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold.
Both of your books are funny. They have humorous moments, and people have said in the reviews they make them laugh, they make them smile. Is that important to both of you when you're writing, to have that humor, and to make, because for me, reading is very much about escapism, and both of your books are they're uplifting and funny, and so to me that's a good read. I don't want to read anything. I don't mind if it's miserable and it's got sadness in it, as long as it's got uplift at the end. Is that important to you?
Yeah, because I think both of our books have got a lot of darkness in them as well. So I think you need both. I don't think I could read a book that was just funny all the time, but yeah, that's really, it is important to me. Yeah, I mean, your first book, Richard, had, you know, there's some quite well, not gruesome exactly, but quite a lot of reality in there, wasn't there, at the same time as the humour?
Yeah, I think I sort of, I don't really think I could write anything that wasn't, where I wasn't at least trying to be funny, because I think even in sort of kind of the best dramas, I think, tend to have moments where people are being funny, because that's what real life is. And I think I know that I write with quite a British sensibility, and I know that, you know, one of the things that we are genuinely quite good at as British is sort of laughing at our troubles, or, you know, that sort of slight gallows humor every now and again. And I think that I don't really think I could, even taking on quite sort of serious topics at times, I think that there just sort of has to be humor in there, because it's kind of how we get through things. And I can never really trust a book if I find them quite hard going if no one's really funny in them, particularly sort of love stories where no one's trying to make the other one laugh. I always find that slightly baffling, but then I think people are just different, I suppose. But I also think that I sort of like Theo when we were young, that I grew up a complete comedy obsessive, and, you know, was sort of from a very young age, my dad in particular was a massive fan of radio, sort of classic radio sitcoms and kind of early 90s and 80s BBC sitcoms, and I kind of grew up on a real kind of diet of those. And I think that I learned probably just as much about writing in general from those sitcoms than I did from reading growing up, particularly as a teenage boy, where even though I was, you know, I did English at uni, and English was the only thing I was really good at school, but there was certainly years where I wasn't really bothering to read, just because it was just not quite the thing for me at that time. But I was still watching, you know, and obsessed with sitcoms. And I think the sort of rhythms of that and jokes, sort of particularly kind of with dialogue, I've completely, you know, I'm probably a bit of a frustrated sitcom writer at heart. So I think even writing quite serious things or big weighty things, there has to be sort of jokes in there for me. I think the best description I heard about sort of, or at least the kind of books I want to write, was a brilliant author called Charlotte Mendelssohn, who I heard someone ask her, you know, you try and write funny and serious, what's the best balance? And she said, oh, I write tragedies with jokes. And I thought, yeah, that sounds about right. I'll try and do that.
It's hard to get the balance though, isn't it, sometimes? Because all my books, until the latest two, I thought I was writing serious books. So all my unpublished books were meant to be thrillers. And my first published book, which is a comedy, was meant to be a thriller, until my agent and editor spotted they spotted the humour in it and said that it would work better as a comedy. And it's funny, that's just a little bit of dialing up or dialing down, and the same story can go two ways. You know, the same thing that could be quite bleak if you just played it, you know, deadpan, can become quite farcical if you don't. And I sometimes struggle with that from a tone perspective, because you have to know where you're pitching and try and stay there to keep your reader experiencing what you want them to experience. But like you, Rich, I was really into the sitcoms, and you know, I think when I think of, there are books that have really made me laugh over the years, but most of my experience with comedy as well is probably from the telly. And I think we are spoiled for good sitcoms as well, I think, in the last 20 years or so.
Yeah, definitely. Good ones out there, isn't there?
Mm.
So what did you enjoy reading as children?
Ooh.
Ooh, that's a good question. I think when I was a very young kid, Roald Dahl obviously was sort of, I think I've got a very strange, vivid memory of reading James and the Giant Peach for the first time, and God knows how old I was, but having a real, almost like an out-of-body experience where I don't think I'd ever read anything where I was plunged, you know, it was like the experience of sort of coming up for air after being underwater. It was sort of incredible. So I definitely read lots of that. And then I was 11 when Harry Potter came out, and Harry was the age I was. So that was really as a kid, you know, and as a teenager, that was the big thing. And then it's funny because I've got lots of memories of reading books, which I don't know whether I would, if I had kids, would give to them to read. Lots of sort of Enid Blyton, sort of the Magic Faraway Train, all these slightly kind of strange books where you think about it in retrospect. So it was, I suppose it was kind of the classics really. And then I think I definitely tried to read things like The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, where I was probably a bit too young to kind of quite understand them. And I think I was just really desperate to read. My parents are big, huge readers. So I think I spent a lot of time as a kid reading books that I just didn't understand in an attempt to try and think, well, I can, I've done this, give me, pass me the Dostoevsky, and then of course would have no idea what the hell was going on. I do think Harry Potter genuinely quite sort of saved me as a reader and then probably as a writer, because that was sort of, that was the big thing when I was a kid.
Yeah, I don't think I read any Dostoevsky at that stage. No, I think I was reading a lot of more Sweet Valley High in my teenage years, and a lot of Agatha Christie. I think I remember just reading those again and again and again when I was a kid. Yeah, and there's a few other books. I don't know if they're even still around. I mean, I loved a book I remember called The Tree That Sat Down. I don't know who it was by. I don't know if I've made it up, but I remember that being really important to me when I was a kid. Yeah, but generally I just got onto the Agatha Christie's, and I think once I liked a book I would read it again and again. The Adrian Mole books were huge. Must have read that 100 times. Yeah, but I think it's interesting you say that there was times you didn't read, Richard, because I also did an English degree, and I think it put me off books for several years. I think I don't think I started reading again for about 3 years after university, just because I read an awful lot of worthy books during that time, and I think I'm more of a commercial fiction fan really. And yeah, some of the heavy going books that I did read then, or Chaucer and stuff like that, I was much more keen to get into a crime book.
Yeah.
I'm never going to read any Thomas Hardy again. I did that. And my sister did it for her degree, and she loves him, and I'm just like, no. Mara Casterbridge did for me forever.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time I picked up a classic book, actually. I think, when they always have all those 100 books you should have read, and I have read quite a lot of them, partly because I did an English degree, but I don't think I'll be reading any of the ones that, I haven't. I read a lot of contemporary fiction, and that's, I don't think I need to go back to the 16th century.
No.
So we're nearly at the end, it's gone really quickly. What do you both like to read now? And do you have anything that you've read lately that you would recommend to our viewers this evening?
Yeah. Oh, good question. I mean, I think, well, like Caroline was saying just then, I tend to really, I read lots of commercial fiction, I'd say. I think I do I'll sort of chuck in the odd kind of classic, or at least something that, that's probably is on one of those lists, almost as a sort of having my vegetables before I can then have a whatever. But I think that I'm incredibly, because I work in publishing, I do tend to be, probably in a slightly detrimental way, incredibly led by what people are talking about. And, it's sort of hard to, particularly with Twitter as well, just to see, you see the kind of same books being talked about again and again. And two books that have come out fairly recently, which is how I discovered them from Twitter and just people recommending them, were Small Pleasures by Claire Chambers, which was just a really beautiful, brilliant, funny, sweet book. And also a kind of really interesting story from an author's perspective, I think, where she had a kind of success in her early years of writing, and then had, I think, a few years of slightly out in the wilderness, and then just wrote this book pure, completely from the heart. It was the things she wanted to write, as opposed to the things she was sort of being told to write, and it's just one of those books. This is just such a terrible way of describing it, but I feel like there are some books where you just feel like the author they've not sat there and slaved over it for hours. It's almost like they've discovered a secret manuscript in a drawer somewhere, and they've just typed it all out, and it's the perfect book. You can't sort of see any of the artifice or any of the lines. It just feels like it's completely from the heart, and that's brilliant. And very similarly, the last book I read, actually, which everyone I know is raving about, and I'm very late to the party, but Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason is just a fantastic. Really, again, brilliantly funny, heartbreaking at times, wonderful book, which has sort of undercurrent of mental illness running through it, but it's just done in a very, very sort of funny, biting, brilliant way. And again, just feels like one of those books which feels like it should have been effortless to write, but obviously, you know, I imagine it was just as hard as anyone writing a book. But those two are definitely two of the best books I read in ages, I think.
Yeah, they're both ones that I hit, like you say, see on social media, see on and both get such good, you know, reviews. Like, in fact, I don't think I've seen anybody say anything detrimental about them, which is quite unusual, because even with the biggest names books, you still see a few snipey comments.
Yeah.
But actually, with both of those, I've only seen good, which is, you know, I think it's quite telling in itself that, you know, how impressive they are. So.
Yeah, I read them both as well. I'd echo that. I particularly like Small Pleasures. I thought it was, yeah, really, really, really nicely written. In terms of the ones I've read lately, I've just finished 56 Days by Catherine Ryan Howard, which is her lockdown book. So for all those people who don't want to read a book set in lockdown, don't read it. But it's a psychological suspense set in lockdown. I really enjoyed that. And Patricia Lockwood, I'm going to get the name wrong, is Nobody Talking About This?
Oh yeah,
which is a book about social media, and it's told in like loads of really short vignettes. And I don't know, just it had a lot to say about our society and stuff in quite a gentle way. I really, really enjoyed that. I think it's actually up for the Women's Prize, which they're announcing tonight, I think. Yeah, but I would highly recommend both of those. And I love Small Pleasures as well.
Great. Well, just before we finish, are you writing at the moment, both of you? And can you share? I know you said that yours is in your head, Caroline, and you want to talk to somebody about it, so you can talk to us. We'll listen.
Okay, I'll talk to you. Mine is it's a contemporary novel, and it's about a family dispute that plays out online. So there's a lot of it is about a commentary on our kind of social media age and stuff like that, which is why it's quite interesting reading a very, very different kind of book about that. So I'm just about to submit the first draft. So it's a bit of a nerve-wracking time, but nerve-wracking but exciting, because then I'll get to talk about it. So it's a comedy again, and it's a comedy where, with the best of intentions, everyone gets everything wrong, which is basically how my books always go. People mean well, and then just dig themselves deeper and deeper holes.
That sounds fascinating. I really like the idea of that, actually, because I mean, I think there's so much online, isn't it? Like you said in your All the Fun of the Fair, you know, you sort of have steered away from the social media and sort of to set it in the 90s, that you didn't have to sort of dabble in that, but then to go full into it, that's that's great.
I have sort of a love-hate relationship with it. I mean, it's really more hate than love, but I'm fascinated by it. I can't look away whilst being absolutely horrified the whole time. So yeah, it's gonna be a bit cathartic, this book. We'll see.
And you, Richard?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in much kind of earlier stages, so I'm sort of planning at the moment and sort of putting together a proposal for the next book. So there's not a huge amount I can say, and it may well all change, but it's something it's probably closer in theme to the first book I wrote, and it's, I think, going to be about a man in his early 30s who's sort of been through something which has meant that he's decided he's no longer allowed to lead a life with any happiness in it, and so he's determined to live an unhappy life. And it's whether we're going to see it play out, to see whether he can achieve that goal, or whether there will be obstacles in his path that will end up bringing unwanted happiness into his life. So that's about where I am so far.
That sounds interesting too. So
yeah.
I'd like the sound of that. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's been such a great conversation, and it's been a pleasure to talk to you and to talk about your great books as well. You can order both of the books from Devon Libraries or Torbay Libraries, or also from our friends at the Bookery in Crediton. There's links in the chat for both of those. Our next in conversation is on Monday, the 13th of September, with author Sharon Dempsey, and I've got a copy of her book here, which is called Who Took Eden Mulligan? And all the details of our events are on our Facebook page. And if you've enjoyed this evening, please like and share. So thank you again, Richard and Caroline, for joining us this evening. And thank you everybody at home for joining us too.
Thank you.
I think we're off. Checking my phone. Make sure we're off. This is the bit I hate. We're off the sit of the. I don't know if Tim's fallen asleep. My husband's doing the tech, but I'm pretty sure it's gone because at the top I can see.
We won't say anything too controversial, just in case.
No.
No, now it's time to talk about politics.
Yeah.
I'm going to just say, are we off? He's playing Football Manager, so he's probably listening.
Who's the
Yeah.
team he plays as on Football Manager? Do you know?
Sorry, what team does he play as?
Yeah.
He plays, I think, as Exeter City. But
And they're sort of they're about to win the Champions League. That's always
yes, that's very much that's exactly how it is. And he takes great pleasure in making sure that Liverpool, because my eldest supports Liverpool, fails miserably. So
of course.
Yeah. And I know all this because he plays it so much and I don't have a clue what he's doing. But yes, I know that he tells me that, you have to do these things sometimes so that he can get better. I think it's called cheating.
Yeah.
Optimization, I'm sure that's what it's called.
Yeah. Thank you for both of you for joining us this evening. And I can see the sun is setting in Wales at the window there.
Oh, yeah.
Whereabouts in Wales are you?
Monmouthshire.
Oh, nice.
It's like Greece. I've been here, it's just been so sunny. We came here dog walking and it's just been absolutely boiling the whole week. It's really, really confusing. But no, it's really nice.
It's unusual for Wales because I spent a lot of time in North Wales on holiday and normally it's just foggy and miserable. But I do love it. I love it. But yeah.
It's been amazing. And the only thing is of course we can't really walk the dog. It's been 27 degrees, 28 degrees. We've had to go out earlier in the morning and just walk around forests and stuff so that it's been covered. And we've never had that before. It's normally about avoiding the rain when you go on a British holiday, isn't it? So it's been quite confusing, but no, it's been lovely.
Well, thank you. Have a lovely holiday, and thank you, Richard, for coming along this evening.
Very fun.
And showing us your lovely wall and sofa.
Yeah, gorgeous.
And look forward to reading what's coming out next.
Oh, thanks very much.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, and nice to meet you, Richard, as well, after all this time.
Thank you.